Hello. I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how to use the Python file convert.json, which essentially takes in a JSON data file and it converts it to either text, Markdown, or Docx. And so at the end of this tutorial, I'll show you the output of a Docx file because it's nice to kind of see how the class is able to create these headings for the JSON data. So the first thing I'll do is I'll start with my IDE PyCharm. Feel free to use whichever IDE you are more comfortable with. I think Anaconda Navigator is a good place to start for IDEs. So you've got Spider, you've got Jupyter Notebook. Spider's similar to PyCharm. Jupyter Notebook is different than both of those IDEs in that it creates its own file extension. So you will need to create a notebook file and then import the Py file as, kind of an external library. Right, so I'll create a new project. I'll just call it demo JSON Docx. And if you're familiar with PyCharm, you know that this sort of automatic virtual environment gets set up when you create a project. So we're going to let that happen and we'll spend a few minutes configuring that. All right, so we can see that PyCharm created a new project directory for me. And within that directory, we can see some environment setups. But we haven't got our Py file or JSON data in this directory. So what we'll do is kind of a quick and easy way to get all the files together. So on my desktop, I've got this directory called demos, and I'll just copy over the Py file and the JSON data and paste that into my project directory. And so when I navigate back to PyCharm, I should see the Py file and the JSON data. So I'll open up the Py file and I'll give you a quick overview of the class code logic from start to finish. The first thing we'll start with is the import. Now, import JSON is pretty standard in your node modules, so you wouldn't need to install JSON manually. Although if you did have any problems installing Python initially, maybe you would get an error with this. If you get an error, just rest assured that there's documentation online. So you can definitely pull up that python.org site and check out the JSON method there. Pypandoc is likely needing to be installed manually. So open up terminal, and we're going to use a package manager for Python called PIP. So PIP should be installed in your machine already, but if you have any problems with PIP, check out the docs. PIP install Pypandoc will do it. Now you'll see a log of, what's happening on your machine, and you can see that the requirement was already satisfied because I've been installing this all morning. But for you, you may see a list of log, and by the end of it, you should see that it was successfully installed. If it's not successfully installed, then check out those docs again to see if there was any problems in the installation. So just close out of that. Right, so convert class is convert JSON is a class, and it takes in two parameters called a file path to the JSON and sort of a title, which is a heading 1. The first thing it does is it converts your JSON to text, and it does this with a method called Json.Dump. Now, Json.Dump is not exactly like a novel contribution, so it's a pretty trivial method, and it can be checked out. And maybe you've used it before, but if you're interested in the logic there, there's some documentation online. The next thing it does is it creates this Markdown file from the JSON. And it does that first by assuming that a dictionary of the JSON data is created. So we do kind of convert that JSON data to a dictionary, and then we iterate through that dictionary. So there's a lot of rule-based logic here. that I won't dive into the detail, but just know that a dictionary does get created, and we sort of use those hashes as the syntax to determine what is a header and what's not a header. So for example, in the sample data JSON file, you can see that our objects and our properties all have the same syntax, and they kind of follow similar patterns. So we use that assumption when we make that Markdown file. The next thing it does is it converts that dictionary to a Markdown file. Okay, so it formats it first and it converts it. And it just does that by opening and writing. Opening a file and then writing to it. And the last thing is not so trivial. We use that Pypandoc library to convert the text to Docx. Sorry, we convert from Markdown to Docx. And this documentation is available online if you're curious of the logic there. So the block at the end can be uncommented out. It's your driver code. So I normally just uncomment the highlighted region with the command /, or if you're on Windows, it's control /. So the first thing you want to do is change your file name to whichever is in your local directory. So in this case, it's sample data, and then I'm just going to name it name my title. So we first instantiate the class convert JSON with the variable converter, and we do this by passing in our file name and our title. The next 3 lines are up to you, so if you're interested in just receiving a text file from the JSON, then feel free to comment out the last 2 lines. Otherwise, if you're interested in, vice versa, receiving a Markdown file, then uncomment out that. In this tutorial, I'm just going to output all 3 files for us, for the sake of a demo. Right, so I'll close out of the sample data file, and then we'll just run the code from here. Great, so you will see some detail in the terminal that tells you each file was successfully installed. And in the end, you should see your output files in your directory. So I'll navigate back over to the directory in my File Explorer, and I just have a quick look at this Docx. Great, so we've got a Docx file that was executed. All right, so if you're interested in checking out the code for this demo, you can find that on my GitHub page under demos directory. It's the convert.json.py. Thanks, guys.